Boy, the Devils really are going through a lot of adversity right now. But what is going on, Devils fans? It is always your host, your best friend, your confidant, your number one source, Neil Villapiano, and welcome to another edition of the Devils State of Mind podcast right here on the Hockey Podcast Network, as well as SportsWire Radio, the best place to get everything you need to know about your Jacob Markstrom got hurt, New Jersey Devils. And as always, Devils fans, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, as always, to check these episodes out. You already know I greatly appreciate it. Shout out to my good friend Ashley Sicardo, who was on the podcast in our last episode. If you haven't, I would highly recommend you go check that out. Talks about her fandom and so much more. I would highly recommend it. But we have another special guest joining us here on this edition of the Devil State of Mind podcast. I've had the pleasure of following him over on LinkedIn for quite some time, and I'll introduce him in just a minute because this is a really good episode that you do not want to miss out. But before we get into anything else, just want to quickly remind everybody, because I mentioned it in the last episode, you have until tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. to enter our giveaway with Tom's River Brewing, official partner of the of the Devil's State of My podcast. Our Luke Hughes signed puck and Devil's Brew, Tom's River Brewing merchandise. Again, all you have to do in the instructions there is follow both Devil's State of Mind and Tom's River Brewing, and tag a friend as well. And you get a bonus entry if you share on your story. So make sure you guys head over to our Instagram at Devil's State of Mind to enter that giveaway. Again, you have until 5:30 p.m. tomorrow, Friday, January 24th. 2025 to enter our giveaway. So good luck to all of you. As always, shout out to our sponsors down below. We got DraftKings. Use promo code THPN. Bet $5. You get $200 instantly in bonus bets. And we'll have a little bit more of a pretty cool ad read for you guys a little later on in this episode. So we always, Devils fans, have a bunch to get to here on the Devils State of Mind podcast. So let's not waste any more time and get rolling. And we will get rolling and drop the puck with basically, I'm going to introduce our awesome guest today. He is the CEO of Loane Hockey, video coach slash scout. It is with great pleasure that we welcome on Loane Hockey, aka Spencer Loane. Spencer, welcome to the Devil State of Mind podcast. How are you doing today, my friend?
Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Really looking forward to talking about the Devils. I obviously am kind of hockey obsessive. So anything hockey related, I'm just really excited to talk about hockey. So
Well, I'm very excited to have you on this episode, and I'm just really excited to get your insights on a lot of things. And so let's dive into it, talking about last night's 5-1 win over the Boston Bruins. The Devils finally, their offense looked like it had been looking like before the holiday break. They scored 3 power play goals and really just had an overall dominant game for pretty much the most part. They got it was a really frustrating first period, but they woke up in the second. Dawson Mercer added 2 goals in this one, and really just overall a really awesome performance from the New Jersey Devils, getting themselves that win and knocking and ending their 4-game losing streak. They have one more game this week on Saturday night in Montreal against the Canadiens, but unfortunately, they will be without a big piece for that game and for the foreseeable future, as in the second period of last night's game, Jacob Markstrom was hit by Justin Barrasso, who collided with him, and that ultimately gave the Devils a power play that they scored on, but Jacob Markstrom was very slow to get up, had to be helped up by Stefan Nason and also one of the trainers, but was fortunately enough to be able to get out to skate under his own power and left the game and did not return. Jake Allen ended up stopping all 13 or 14 shots that he faced. Really good job by Jake Allen, and he will be the Devils' number one goaltender for now. And the most up-to-date news we have about Jacob Markstrom, and this is from Sheldon Keefe last night. He basically said that Markstrom is in good spirits and that he will miss some time. The last time he said the words miss some time, he was talking about Eric Holla, who was eventually put on IR and is skating and practicing with the team. So the good news is that he probably should be back fairly soon. But for Jacob Markstrom, they still haven't got an MRI because the Devils are off today. I think we'll know a lot more tomorrow on Friday the 24th. But Spencer, I want to get your initial thoughts on the Devils' for the foreseeable future losing their number one goaltender and a guy who really has been in the Vesna conversation for most of this year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something with Markstrom where he's just been playing so well. I know I've watched a lot of Devils games throughout the year, and he's just positionally he's so sound, and I feel like he gives a lot of confidence to the Devils, especially their decor. Like just the way he plays the game positionally. Obviously, he's a big frame in net, so that helps too. But just the way it went down yesterday. I feel like Jake Allen's a guy you can actually rely upon. Like he's had some starting experience previously too. So I feel like that's something where they're going to have a lot of confidence in both their goalies. But I feel like with in this case scenario with Jake Allen, he's a guy that's had starting roles previously with the Blues and even with Montreal. And analytically speaking, he's made some really good saves in really good areas. So he's been able to stop a lot of interior shots and a lot of high danger shots in previous teams too.
Mhm.
So just the situation they're in, obviously it's concerning with Markstrom out. And I remember watching the game yesterday. I was like, it didn't look good too. He wasn't really moving too much, but at least you have a situation where you have a reputable goaltender who can fill in that time, that void as a number one, and you can bring up a backup who might be able to get some starting experience in the meantime as well from maybe Utica or if they have a third string up with New Jersey right now. And yeah, that's definitely helpful that they have Jake Allen there. Otherwise, I feel like this would be a little bit more tricky for them to adapt to over the course of time, especially if it's a longer term thing. And it could be something with him where they could still rely upon him for a longer period of time as well.
Yeah, and again, it was one of those things where, with the Devils struggling so much offensively, that the one positive note of of the last base, not even the last couple of weeks. I mean, basically the whole season, Jacob Markstrom has been fantastic in his first year in New Jersey, and I think just seeing that was absolutely, it felt like a kick in the gut if you're the Devils. I know that Jack Hughes also missed a little bit of the second period, but he returned and he was fine. He had to get a couple of stitches. So fortunately enough from that regard, Jack Hughes is obviously fine. But I'm glad you brought up talking about Jake Allen because that was going to be my next question to you about, why should Devils fans feel confident in Jake Allen? Because I would argue, Spencer, that Jake Allen could probably be a starter for a good majority of teams in the league right now with the way that he's capable of playing. And even before getting that win last night, which was his first since November 23rd, I felt overall of late he was playing very, very well, despite not getting the results that he wanted because of the Devils' lack of scoring.
Yeah, exactly. Like with him in net, you're just getting a lot of different attributes that he can bring. Like obviously he's a sizable goalie too. He's really good at stopping rebound shots. He's really good at being able to move around the crease and really good at side to side movement. So I just feel like in terms of how he plays the game, and obviously, like I said before, like the experience he brings and what he's able to bring in net, I just feel like this is a situation where the Devils they can rely upon him for a period of time and a set period of time, and depending on how long Markstrom is out, they're going to be having a guy in net that's going to be sturdy and sound. And obviously, he's played well for the Devils too, which is definitely a huge bonus for that in that case scenario too. And I feel like he'll be a really good goalie down the stretch for them as well.
And one thing to kind of keep in mind for Devils fans that don't know, when the Devils acquired Jake Allen last year, at the deadline, they did give the Canadians a conditional third round pick that would become a second if Jake Allen plays, I think, between 30 and 40 games, which he's currently at 15 after last night's game. And again, he'll be the starter moving forward. So I would I would like to believe that it's more likely that that pick's going to end up being a second, but I really don't think that that's something that the Devils are obviously too concerned about. One last thing I wanted to bring up with Jacob Markstrom and Spencer, I want to get your thoughts on this. Was Dr. Haras Gruwal, who a lot of people know in like the hockey world in terms of asking about injuries. A lot of people were asking him about what he feels the injury could be for Jacob Markstrom and the time frame for him to return. And he gave a couple of different um, outcomes to what it could be. So he said if it's an MCL sprain, it depends on the grade of it, often week to week for goalies, which I think for Many people would say that's the best case scenario. If he has a torn meniscus, that's 4 to 6 weeks for trim and then 4 months for repair. So that would pretty much mean the end of his season if that's the case. And then obviously, if it's a torn ACL, he's out 5 plus months and will again be will be done for the year. But at the end of the thread that this doctor put out, he said, all in all, cautiously optimistic Markstrom is on a day to week timeline and not headed for surgery, but won't know for sure until after his MRI tomorrow. Sheldon Keefe also said that Markstrom was feeling a lot better physically after the game. So what do you make of all that, Spencer? Like, is that a fair assessment to look at? Like what are your thoughts on hearing that?
I think it's interesting because obviously it's a wide range of what could happen in the future. Like it could be as little as day to day, or it can be something where he could potentially be out the rest of the year. And I feel like even in the worst case scenario, if he's out 4-ish months or so, and if you get Allen playing really well down the stretch, you could be in a really good situation, maybe even in a tough situation where if this does happen and Markstrom does come back closer to playoff time, which assuming this is the Devils end up in playoff contention with the way they're playing right now, I feel like this could be an interesting situation to see how that could play out. But with Markstrom specifically, I don't feel like I'm necessarily too concerned. I feel like he'll be a week to week type thing, just the way it looked yesterday. And obviously,
Hmm.
I can't really say too much else other than watching on TV. But I
Right.
feel like with him, it'll be more of a day to day or week to week type thing. I don't necessarily envision it being super serious, but obviously,
Mhm.
there might be some precautions in there with the way the injury looked on TV yesterday. It definitely looked a little bit worse, but I
Yeah.
feel like it shouldn't necessarily be too concerning as of right now. So
And that's the way that I've kind of gone into this, trying to have an optimistic mindset. Because I saw on Twitter last night, Devils Twitter, worst case scenario, right? I think everybody feels that we're going to get really bad news and it's going to be end of the year. I would say this to Devils fans: if Markstrom is truly out for the year, the Devils will tell us that tomorrow, if that's when we're getting the MRI. They won't sugarcoat it and say, "Oh, he's out for the foreseeable future." No, if it's truly a seasoning injury, knowing the way hockey is, they will tell us because they don't want to keep it, you know, too long. I know with Dougie Hamilton last year, it was a little bit different because I think people were hopeful that he could return. And I think if the Devils had made the playoffs, I think there was a chance that he was going to return. But I think fortunately for him, it was probably better that we didn't so that he could be fully recovered and obviously playing this year. But yeah, with Jacob Markstrom, it's a wait and see approach right now. But just hearing some of the things that I've heard, I think we're leaning more towards the optimistic outlook. And I think we'll probably know more as early as probably tomorrow because the Devils will practice before heading to Montreal. And we'll see. And I think it's fair to say, Spencer, that um, Markstrom's opportunity to play in the Four Nations is pretty much over at this point for Sweden, which I know is not ideal for Sweden because they lose their top goaltender. But you do have Gustafsson, who's had a really strong year in Minnesota. So I mean, they still have a good amount of talent between the pipes. But yeah, Jacob Markstrom out, going to miss some time. That is about as far as we know. With they didn't even say if it was a lower body or upper. I mean, it's obvious it's a lower body injury, and we'll see. Hopefully, next 24 to 48 hours, we'll have a little bit clearer idea. So I mentioned Dougie Hamilton before, Spencer, and it's actually crazy how you posted this today, and this is a perfect segue into this. For those of you that don't know, and I'll bring it up here, Spencer over on LinkedIn has a whole newsletter that you can subscribe to called Lone Hockey, and you get it both on your email and you get notifications for it on LinkedIn. I have been subscribed to Spencer's newsletter for about a year now, probably a little bit more than that. And he's written a couple things about the Devils, but the one he brought up today was talking about Dougie Hamilton opening weak side passing lane, which is fascinating for me. Dougie's coming off scoring a goal last night, so obviously he's coming in with he's feeling a little bit good about himself. He's been scoring a bit more of late, but Spencer, can you go into a little bit deeper dive for people who are checking us out on YouTube or listening to wherever they get their podcasts? Just a general idea as to what you were talking about with regards to Dougie Hamilton.
Yeah, so the goal last night, I was really intrigued by. I feel like when you watch Dougie Hamilton, like there's two things that really jump off the board. It's his shot and his power play ability. I feel like he's a guy you don't necessarily notice a ton outside of that. Like, yes, he's a really good defenseman. He can play top pairing minutes, but I feel like those are the two standout qualities that he has is being able to run a power play and then his shooting ability. He's got an electric shot.
Hmm.
And so with that, I was talking about how on the power play yesterday, he was opening up the weak side lane for Jesper Bratt because Jesper Bratt, he rotated in and out along the half wall with Nico Hischier. And Jesper Bratt came down the half wall, was able to find or was able to wait a few seconds and delay the play, which he usually does a really good job of doing. And he was able to find Dougie Hamilton, who was creeping on the weak side of space around that face-off circle area, and then he was able to open up that lane, and he was able to one time the puck in the back of the net. So it's just a really good display. And obviously the Devils have a really good power play. Like you have Heischer, Hughes, and Brott. Like Hughes and Brott are basically clones of each other. And then you have Dougie Hamilton, and then I don't remember who the net front player is off my
Stefan
head, but
Nason. To
yeah,
give you,
that's a
yeah,
really
Stefan
good
Nason.
unit. Just
Hmm.
a really good unit, and Dougie Hamilton just did a really good job of not only opening the lane, but being able to use his one timer and being able to time the shot effectively. So that's essentially what I was talking about. I really like Dougie Hamilton as a player. I feel like he's one of the more underrated defensemen in the league.
Hmm.
And he's a guy, when you talk about top pairing defensemen, he doesn't necessarily scream out at you right away. But when you
Hmm.
watch him more in depth and when you watch the details of his game, he's definitely a guy that definitely stands out. Not only on size alone, but also his just his well roundedness and how he's able to play the game. He's very steady and reliable.
And I think what's great is that he's pretty much been as advertised since the Devils signed him a few years back in free agency, and I know that there's been Devils fans, on social media calling for them to trade him for somebody else. I mean, it's not happening. Number one, number two, I don't think you would get any sort of the same value if you were to move on from Dougie. Also, Dougie Hamilton was one of the first guys that really came here to help rebuild this team. I mean, obviously you had Nico Hischier, you had Jack Hughes, you had Jesper Bratt, but Dougie comes in as a free agent, is the top free agent in his draft in his class, and he picks the Devils, and he's been a big asset. The one thing, Spencer, I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I don't know if you've noticed this as much as I've noticed this, and a lot of Devils fans. It seems like on the power play, particularly, Jack Hughes seems to ignore Dougie. Like he kind of like looks either for his own shot, obviously, or it's not even like acknowledging that he's there. Do you have any idea why that might be the case? Is it a lack of communication? Is it a lack of trust between Jack Hughes and Dougie? Or do you think it's more Jack just trying to be as aggressive as possible and trying to do it on his own, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's for one, I think it's him wanting to shoot and trying to be more of a shot threat. And obviously, he's a guy that can really rely on his shot now. I feel like over the course of the last 2 years now, he's become more of a shot threat, not only in the power play, but 5-on-5. And then at the same time, I think the second thing is the connection between Brought and Heishier. I feel
Hmm.
like just he's more likely to go to those guys when it comes to playmaking. And obviously, he's more relied upon and more likely to pass to those guys because of their forwards. I feel like with Dougie, him being a defenseman, it's kind of a little different because he's
Yeah.
not likely and as likely to pass back to the D as much. So
Hmm.
I feel like with the forwards and specifically talking about Heishier and Brat, I feel like he's just more comfortable passing to those two guys.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's the odd occasion where you see him pass to Hamilton, but it's not necessarily in a prime shooting position or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I just noticed a lot of when Hughes is passing, he's passing either downhill or he's looking to pass back to the point, or he's just looking to maneuver and come across the top of the circle and in between. So
Mhm.
rotating in and out with the D. So I just feel like there's a lot of commonality between him, Brought, and Heishier in that sense, especially when it comes to their power play as well.
Do you feel that Jack's mistakes of late, in overtime and just in general, are of big concern? Is it something that Sheldon Keefe needs to, talk to Jack about? Because, I mean, I would argue in the last couple of games, he's made some pretty bad passes that ultimately resulted in goals going the other way. Luke Hughes to a lesser extent, but obviously with what happened against Toronto, leaving William Nylander wide open while changing for reasons unknown. And then obviously his turnover led to the first goal against the Flyers last weekend. But specifically talking about Jack, I guess really the question I want to ask you is, do you feel that Jack's doing that more often because he feels like he has to do it on his own, or is he overthinking it right now? Like, what do you think the situation is?
I think with him, I think there's times where even the top players they go through spurts where they're not playing well, right? I feel like every player has that situation where they don't necessarily have a good stretch of games, or they might make a bad stretch of passes or stuff like that. I feel like with Hughes, it's more of a short term thing where he might make some bad passes in the meantime, but eventually you'll see that playmaking. Like you'll see the other end of the spectrum where he'll be making unbelievable plays, highlight reel plays,
Hmm.
and I feel like that's kind of the interesting thing with the top players is like they can go all the way to the bottom sometimes, or all the way to the top where he, or at their
Right.
bottom they're going to be heavily criticized in the media and stuff like that. And at the top of
Yeah.
their games, it's just going to be like, wow, complete opposite, and they're just going to be dominating possession. So I feel like with him, it's more of a short term thing. I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about,
Hmm.
and I'm sure we'll probably see in the next week or so like some sort of crazy highlight from him because knowing him, he always seems to find a way to do something every single game. He's just so electric to watch every single game. So I feel like with him, just the playmaking talent, the scoring talent combined, like there'll be a situation over the course of the next week or 2 weeks that you'll find something on the highlight reel when it comes to his game.
Well, hopefully, it could start as soon as Saturday against the Canadians. That would be ideal. I mean, Jack did have a really good game. I felt against the Bruins, so I'm hoping that he can build upon that, and I hope the team can build upon it. So we're going to take a quick break so I can do this ad read, and then when we come back, the first thing I want to do is talk to you a little bit about some ideal candidates for deadline acquisitions for the Devils, and then lastly, because I know you asked specifically for this, I want you to have the floor to talk about some Devils prospects that stand out to you, and I'm excited to hear this as well. So let's jump in really quickly to this quick ad read here from our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Playoffs? We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning in the playoffs, and you, my friend, can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score six. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Now, Spencer, I don't know if you have your own picks for this week when it comes to the conference championship games over in the NFL. We got Chiefs against the Bills once again, and then we got the Commanders against the Eagles. Do you have any quick picks you wanna quickly put out there?
Honestly, not my football knowledge is not very good. I will say that. So
Fair
you
enough.
definitely have the floor with that one.
All right, fair enough. I mean, simply put, I'll tell you guys really quickly that you can even do something as simple as picking a team to win. You think, Kansas City is going to prevail yet again and go on to the Super Bowl? You could put that down. If you're feeling a little bit of a hot take, if you feel that Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders can go into the city of brotherly love and get the win over the Philadelphia Eagles, you can place that as well, and so much more. And all you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now and use code THPN. And for new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. It's that simple, guys. This is a deal you cannot pass up. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. All right, so we shift over here, and I want Spencer, before we get into prospects, there's been a lot of chatter when it comes to the Devils in terms of the trade deadline. There was the Shimon Nemec, rumors, which I want to get your thoughts on that when we talk about the prospects, because according to Elliot Friedman, it's pretty much died down at this point. That again, Shimon Nemec is not going anywhere anytime soon. And I wrote an article for Pucks and Pitchforks that came out yesterday talking about the Devils need to give Nemec more time here because he will develop into that top pairing defenseman that we've all been hoping for. But obviously, there's JT Miller from Vancouver. Although it sounds like right now the Devils are kind of debating whether or not they want to make a big move like this. But are there some names out there that interest you when it comes to maybe an acquisition to help, whether it's the bottom six for the Devils or their top nine, maybe a seventh defenseman? Like, what are some names out there that you think could be potential good fits? Um, I know that there might be somebody in Chicago that could become of interest for the Devils.
Yeah, I think that the JT Miller one is a really interesting one, right? Because I feel like on one hand, they have a really good team to the point where they don't necessarily need to add a top six forward offensively. A lot of their future to get that because they already have a lot of firepower there. And on the other hand, I'm like, okay, if you can trade for a guy that can produce even more offensively, what could this team do in the playoffs? And I feel like JT Miller is just a guy who can do a little bit of everything and
Yeah.
is that type of player. Yes, he's outspoken, and yes, he's had some different dealings in the media, but at the same time, a really intriguing player on the ice. Like he brings so much to the table, super competitive, super engaged on the forecheck, a guy who's a really good two-way center and has really evolved from more of a winger early to his career to more of a center now in Vancouver and just plays the game hard in all facets of the game. And I feel like that's what he'd bring to the Devils. And I don't necessarily know what would go back the other way. I know I've heard rumors about like Dawson Mercer being thrown in there, or Simon Nemec, those type of
Hmm.
guys. But with Miller, I feel like he's that type of guy where you can get a captain in him, you can get a ton of leadership, and at the same time, he brings so much all over the board offensively that he's kind of a guy that's hard to pass up. And I feel like with this Devils team, if they really want to take that next step forward, taking a big splash move like this wouldn't necessarily be a bad option. And JT Miller's
Hmm.
just obviously he's a favorite of mine, and I really enjoy watching him just because of the way he plays the game and how engaged he is in every facet of the play. But
Yeah.
I just feel like he'd be a really good add for them inside their top six. And at the same time, he'd be really good on their power play too. You can get some net front ability and bumper ability out of him. And just a very versatile scoring winger slash center who can do a little bit everything. Like I can't think of one thing off the top of my head that JT Miller can't do because he's just so reliable and so
Hmm.
productive in every facet of the game.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, he certainly fits a lot of different, boxes that the Devils are trying to check off in terms of taking the next step. I think what's going to end up keeping the Devils away from probably acquiring JT Miller is just simply the fact that they don't feel comfortable adding another long-term contract to their roster right now. Now, again, things can change. I think that JT Miller, it's pretty much to me any day now that he's going to get dealt. It's just a matter of where. My money's on Carolina right now, but again, things can change. I know for the Devils that would not be ideal to have to deal with him once the playoffs gets underway because it's pretty much clear that I think the Devils and Hurricanes are destined to meet in the first round of the playoffs. But we'll have to wait and see when we get closer to April. But are there any other names out there that stand out to you that you think could be good fits for the Devils, whether at the deadline or pretty close to it?
Honestly, there's not too many that come to mind. I feel like with this Devils group, they're really solidified in terms of all facets of their game. Like obviously they have really good goaltending. We talked about their goaltending before, and their decor is really good already as well. I feel like they got a good hybrid mix of older guys and younger guys in that mix and in that crop who can also quarterback the power play and be reliable on the PK. And I
Hmm.
feel like with this offensive group, you get guys who, even if you call some guys up from Utica, you can get some reliable,
Hmm.
hardworking checking forwards who can play in your middle six or your bottom nine, who can also be reliable. I feel like with the Devils, you're getting a lot of guys who are really engaged inside of their bottom nine. Like they have a lot of firepower up front offensively in their top six, but like their bottom six is also really underrated. It just doesn't necessarily get talked about a ton. And I feel like for them, it's just they don't necessarily have to do too much. I feel like if they don't want to make a major splash type move, I understand it. But at the same time, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the coming months when it comes to trade acquisitions and what they think is best for them.
There's a lot of different options out there. There's been a lot of different names. Jake Evans is one of them, who the Devils will see on Saturday. Although Jake Evans, I think, is wanted by a lot of contending teams, but I think Montreal is leaning towards trying to keep him moving forward. But we'll see. We'll definitely keep our eye on that. There's some guys with the Islanders I've mentioned before: Brock Nelson, Kyle Palmieri, former Devil. Somebody mentioned to me Anders Lee. I mean, I don't know because he is their captain. I don't know if they want to make that move, but there's a lot of different names out there. I've mentioned Taylor Hall in the past. And look, I've said this before about Taylor Hall. The whole locker room thing that was talked about and like he became a cancer, that was a fan driven thing via Twitter. There really was no backing to that. There was no proof that that was a real thing. And I think he would be an interesting fit. I mean, he's played with several guys on this team. But again, there's a lot of different ways the Devils can go about it. And I think that Tom Fitzgerald is going to um, be patient with it. And he might be looking for another goaltender depending on the severity of Jacob Markstrom. He might look for somebody that could, that maybe is a bit more of a veteran guy that could play along Varlamov, unless they feel comfortable with Isaac Poulter or Nico Dawes, although Dawes is coming off of an injury recently. So I don't know how much confidence they have in them. But like Spencer said, this could be a really interesting deadline for the Devils. I wouldn't be surprised though if they do make a move. It just depends on what it is. So now we've come to the part that I'm sure Spencer's been waiting for since we got on here. And it's time to talk a little bit about the Devils prospects. And they have a lot of intriguing names out there. But Spencer, give me some prospects that really stand out to you in the Devils world.
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind right away is obviously Seamus Casey. Like, I love talking about Seamus Casey. He's so electric to watch. Like, offensively, in terms of his defensive play, to me, he reminds me a little bit of like a, I don't know how to phrase this, like a Walmart-ish version of Quinn Hughes. I don't know how
Mm,
else to say that. But with Seamus Casey, he's a guy who he's very reliable in terms of his angles defensively. Like, he plays a modern day game defensively based on angles, surfing, how he uses his feet to defend, and how he uses his hands to defend in like one-on-one battles and also corner battles. I feel like Seamus Casey's a guy who is, he obviously got some games early on in the season this year too, and he looked really good in those games. I feel like this year might not necessarily be the time for him to play a full-time role, but this or next year it'll be an interesting situation to see when it comes to him. He's so fun to watch and so exciting to watch. And I believe he just got named an AHL All-Star as well. So he's been playing
he
really
was.
productive. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
and
been,
fortunately, he's been dealing with an injury, so Shimon Nemec is his replacement in the All Star game. But yeah, good for Casey. He's had a really good year in Utica.
yeah, been very exciting to watch. And then another one that comes to mind, who's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, not necessarily as flashy offensively, is Anton Salayev playing the KHL. I wasn't surprised when they drafted him this past year because Salayev's a guy who's a shutdown style defenseman. When you look at how he plays the game, Kevin Ball kind of comes to mind, and obviously they traded away Kevin Ball. But I feel
Hmm.
like just in terms of the replacement level player and NHL readiness, he's going to be a guy who can very well be NHL ready in the next, I would say, year or so. And Salayev's a guy, he plays a very good shutdown game. He's a steady defensive defenseman who also gives some vibes of Jamie Alexiak in Seattle. I feel like that's another really good comparison when it comes to how he plays the game and can shut plays down. I feel like as he's going to fill out over time, you're going to see better puck skills and better playmaking ability from him. And you're also going to see better physical play from him. But he's definitely a guy I could see in the next year, year and a half or so be able
Hmm.
to play maybe some time in Utica or some time in the NHL. I feel like he's got a lot of NHL readiness, and he's arguably the most NHL ready when it comes to their prospects. And
Yeah.
then some other guys that come to mind are Lenny Hamanhaho.
Yeah.
Haman
Haminaho. Yeah.
Hamanhaho. That was hard to say. And then Arseny Gritsyuk. I feel like those two guys
Oh,
are interesting.
oh,
Where
please pump
Gritsyuk's been playing,
Grisiak's tires, Spencer. Please pump his
he's
tires.
really good.
He's so good.
He's really good, and he could be a guy that can. I don't know when he's going to come over, if he's going to come over, but certainly a guy that's playing really well in KHL. Really hard nosed player. Like he's super,
Yeah.
super competitive, and he's really filled out physically over the course of time too, which is another really intriguing thing. And
Mhm.
then with Lenny, he's an interesting one where he's been playing really well in the Finnish Elite League too, and has obviously garnered that reputation over there. I would be curious to see if they might consider potentially trading some of these guys in the near future. Like if it gets
Mm.
to a point where they're say 23, 24 years old or around that age, I wonder if they might consider moving them and those type of guys to be able to potentially get someone who's more NHL ready or an NHL reliable player or veteran. But
Mhm.
I feel like with those 2 guys, those are obviously really intriguing options as well. And then it's interesting when you look at the other end of the spectrum, you got guys like Chase Stillman and Nolan Foote, and you're still trying to figure
Mhm.
out what those type of guys are at the same time. But they got a
Big
lot of
game for Nolan
intriguing
Foote last night.
prospects.
He had a 5-point game last night for Utica. Really,
Yeah.
really good game for Foote. Yeah.
Yeah, Foot's definitely a power style winger who can play a hard nosed game too. He's really competitive. His forechecking ability is really noticeable. And I feel like just the thing that needs to get dialed in with him is the offensive play because you don't really know
Yeah.
what he is offensively quite yet.
Mhm.
And if he can be a consistent NHLer bringing that offense, because even the bottom sixers in the NHL are in the NHL today, excuse me, are producing a lot offensively. If you look at a team
Mhm.
like Colorado, for example, and their bottom six, how productive those guys are on top of being competitive and engaged on the forecheck. I just feel
Yeah.
like you have to have a separating element when it comes to being able to play in today's bottom six compared to
Mhm.
many years ago. But with Nolan Foote, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how it plays out longer term. But yeah, I definitely going back to Seamus Casey. I just feel like he's the guy for them right now. He's
Mhm.
the one guy that just really stands out in terms of the attributes that he brings, how ready he can be for the league because he's already played some games with the Devils this year. And
Mhm.
every time I think of Devils prospects, he just always comes to mind for me. He's just always so exciting to watch
Yeah.
and brings so many unique abilities to the table.
I love that. Now, got 2 questions for you. With Chase Stillman, do you feel that the Devils overvalued him when it came to where he was drafted? Because obviously he hasn't had really much of an opportunity getting into the NHL at this point of his career, and he doesn't seem to be the big goal scorer. But then again, I don't think that was ever really something that people were talking about. Like I just think back to that draft because that was the same draft that they drafted Luke Hughes. Do you feel that the Devils overvalued him? Do you still feel that he could help this Devils team at some point, or do you feel like he needs a change of scenery at this point?
I definitely think that it might come to a point where you might need a change of scenery because you look at where he's at in the AHL right now, you'd like him to be a little bit more productive offensively. And he's a guy, well, the name obviously helps too, him being a Stillman name. And in that sense, I feel like that kind of helped him with his stock a little bit more. But obviously, he was a very productive player coming out of junior. He brought a lot of attributes that pro teams really like when it comes to his game. Like he brings an all around game, he brings a skill game, and he brings a really good playmaking game. I feel like he brings a lot of speed too to the table. So it's just interesting with him. I wonder what he could be in the near future if he's going to continue to be more of that AHL level player. If that's so, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get moved. And we've seen a lot of moves from other teams throughout the season where it's AHL for AHL type deals
Mhm.
from other teams as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they just try to give him a change of scenery to try and make sure that he's better off and could be more
Yeah.
productive for himself. Because some teams they like to do that just for the better of the player, so that way they can
Mhm.
have an extended career, and that way they don't get too slowed down in their development by staying in the same system. So I
Mhm.
feel like it might come to a point where it definitely might be the end of the tenure for him in New
Yeah.
Jersey, and I'd just be curious to see how long it does take for that.
It'll be interesting. He's had a pretty decent year in Utica, but I mean, the Comets have obviously had a tough go of it. But recently, they've been playing a lot better. Again, Shimon Nemec even had a 5-point night not too long ago. Um, but my second to last, because now I just realized I had a third question I want to ask you. But second to last question is, I want you to talk a little bit more about Arseny Gritziuk because he to me is the diamond in the rough when it comes to the Devils prospects because of the success he's had in the KHL, and also just from what his agent was talking about the plan is he's going to immediately come over to the NHL when his contract is up, and he's not going to, go to Utica first. Like, the goal for him is to be an NHL player next season, because from what I was told, his contract and his rights won't be transferred fully to the Devils until after the season is over for both teams. So it's kind of, we're not going to see him this year. But can you talk to us a little bit more about Gritsyuk and why so many people are hyping him up as much as they are, including myself?
Yes. So just for like a Devils type comparison, I feel like he resonates with Igor Sergengovich a lot, obviously former Devil. And I feel like the way he plays the game and how Sharangovich came over and was able to make an immediate impact, I feel like you can get something similar with Gritsuk. I was always a fan of him when he was drafted too. I feel like he should have gotten drafted higher, but he was just a really good value pick then, and it's obviously really translated well now. What really stands out to me the most is how competitively he plays the game, how engaged he is in his details. Like some players are really engaged when it comes to their off puck play and their on puck play, and simultaneously linking those two can be a little bit difficult for some players to do. But he's one of those players where he puts himself in good spots off the puck, so it allows him to get in better retrieval situations when he has the puck on his stick. And he's a really intriguing player in the ozone too when it comes to his movement, how he's able to understand rotations there.
Yeah.
I feel like he's really good working the flanks. He's obviously got a really good shot, so he can really control the flanks effectively there. He also is really good and tight with his puck skill, so he brings a lot of attributes with his puck skill, his shooting ability, and his playmaking ability to be a threat
Hmm.
from interior space in the ozone. And just from a forechecking perspective, he's noticeable at cutting ice in half, so he can do it with his stick, he can do it with speed, and when it comes to that forechecking ability, it's obviously really important in the KHL, being on a larger ice surface, trying narrow space and cut space down as soon as you can. So with Gritsuk, very competitive, very
Yeah.
tenacious. And as he's worked his way up through the MHL ranks to where he's at now, he's just become so much better year in and year out to be the player that he is now. He's become a very productive player for his KHL team as well. So he's really exciting to watch. I feel like when he comes over to the Devils, he could be a guy who can be a top nine winger and can fill that role really well. Might be able to get 30, maybe even 40 points out of him in his rookie year.
Hmm.
And he's just a guy who it brings those all around attributes, and he's really translated in the KHL
Yes.
and has been very productive in his KHL time as well.
He's also a good friend of the podcast, I might add. He seems to like a lot of the things when I talk about him, so which I can't blame him. But lastly, here for you, Spencer, is I need to get your thoughts on the whole Shimon Nemec situation, if you want to call it that. So obviously, he, he was interviewed by Denick Sport last week, European newspaper, and he basically said through loose translation that like it's not time for him to be like David Urich, who eventually requested a trade and got moved. But he feels like if things don't change down the road, then like obviously this is something to talk about. But this was also right before he had a 5 point night in Utica, so it was kind of a perfect storm. But then there was a lot of talk over the last 4 or 5 days, almost week now, about is he going to get moved? What's the situation with that? Is he going to be part of a JT Miller package? Like all that stuff. And I mentioned before, I wrote an article that talked about the Devils need to give Shimon Nemec another chance in the NHL. And I think that they will, whether that's at some point this year or next year. But I really want to get like your thoughts on Shimon Nemec and everything that's going on.
It's a really interesting situation with him because I don't feel like they're necessarily going to trade him, and I don't necessarily think they want to right now because he's obviously a player they have high hopes for, and it's just really interesting with him because yeah, you look at the Devils decor right now and they have a lot of options there. So not necessarily a knock on him, but at the same time, it's kind of like where is he going to play? If he's
Yeah.
in Utica, it's kind of hard for him to get up and get a consistent spot. He was obviously a very productive player with them. I believe it was last year, 2 years ago now, and was just playing really well. I thought he was going to stick and try to progress out of that and get better.
Hmm.
And it's kind of turned into what it is now. And again, I don't necessarily see him getting traded out of there too soon, but I can definitely see there come a point where if he's there even next year in the AHL again, I would be like, okay, this guy probably needs a trade, probably needs a change of scenery. Otherwise, he's just not going to truly tap into his potential. And I feel like that's kind of where he's at. It's like he knows he can be an NHLD and provide that impact. It's just he's in a weird situation where he's still playing a lot in Utica. He's still an all star there, as mentioned. It's just like what is he going to do next, and what's going to happen next with him?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the rest of this year goes for him, and where the Devils are. With Jonathan Kovacevic becoming such a surprise in a positive way for the Devils, it obviously makes things harder in terms of that right side. I wouldn't be totally surprised the Devils said that, you know what, we're going to move on from Kovacevic at the end of the year because he is a free agent, and we're gonna get Nemec back up here. I wouldn't be surprised if they kept Kovacevic and tried to move Nemec, although I've argued the latter is probably a mistake, and given the age of Nemec and the potential that he still has in the NHL, whereas Kovacevic is kind of like, I think we kind of know who he is at this point with his career. But that's not something to totally worry about right now. The Devils, like I said, coming off of that win against the Bruins, scoring 5 goals. The hope is they can build upon that and get rolling again like they were before the holiday break. But Spencer, this was absolutely awesome to have you on. Like I said before, I'm a really big fan of the stuff you put out on your newsletter. I read all of them. I think you do a fantastic job. For those of for people out there that want to check out more of your work and everything, let the folks at home know where they can check you out and follow you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm just mainly on LinkedIn and YouTube. I have my Lone Hockey podcast that I do on YouTube, and then my Lone Hockey newsletter that's on LinkedIn and also on Substack for those who want to do that or subscribe via email too. So that's just where I'm at. Nothing too fancy.
Hey, I love that. And I'll leave links to Spencer stuff in the description here on YouTube, also over on Twitter as well, for you guys to check out. Again, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you go check out his stuff because he gives you a lot of really good insight into some things about players that maybe you're not even really thinking about. And I think that, Dougie Hamilton piece that he just put out is a prime example of that. And it was awesome to read and awesome to get his breakdown of. But Spencer, thank you so much for your time today and coming on the podcast. We will definitely have you on again down the road, but really just appreciate your time today and your input and insight into the Devil's world, my friend.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.